The year is 1888, and London exists as two cities occupying the same space. One glitters with gaslight and progress, where gentlemen in silk top hats discuss empire over brandy, and ladies in bustling crinolines promenade through Hyde Park. The other London crouches in shadow, its narrow alleys reeking of sewage and desperation, where 13-year-old girls wake before dawn to breathe poison for pennies. You're about to become one of those girls, walking through the gates of the Bryant and May match factory in Bow East London. In your pocket, perhaps 3 farthings jingle together, yesterday's wages, already spoken for by rent and bread. Your fingers will learn to move with mechanical precision, dipping wooden splints into white phosphorus paste that glows like captured moonlight. The same phosphorus that brings light to Victorian drawing rooms will settle into your bones, beginning its patient work of destruction. But this is not merely a story of suffering. This is the story of how the weakest members of Victorian society, teenage girls, many of them Irish immigrants, all of them considered disposable, discovered they possessed a power that could shake the foundations of industrial capitalism. You will witness the arrival of a fierce reformer named Annie Besant. Feel the dangerous thrill of hope when her newspaper article exposes your truth, and experience the terrifying exhilaration of walking out those factory gates not as a victim, but as part of something larger. You will stand on picket lines, meet in smoky pubs to plan strategy, and watch as your struggle reaches the halls of Parliament itself. If you find yourself drawn to stories of unexpected courage, of ordinary people who changed history, consider subscribing to hear more tales from the shadows of the past. Leave a comment about where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps you're in London itself, where these very streets once echoed with the footsteps of match girls marching for justice. Now, settle into your cozier spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let the modern world fade away as we travel to London, 1888, where the air tastes of sulphur and hope is as dangerous as the phosphorus you handle, where you're about to discover that even the smallest spark, when joined with others, can ignite a revolution. Your story begins where every matchgirl's day begins, in the absolute darkness before dawn, 4:30. The cold has already found you, seeping through the thin blanket that serves as your only defence against the London winter. Your eyes open to absolute darkness. Not the gentle dark of evening, but the thick, oppressive blackness that comes in the hours when even thieves have gone to bed. The church bells haven't rung yet, but your body knows. 4:30 in the morning has trained itself into your bones, more reliable than any clock you could never afford. The floor beneath your feet sends shivers up your spine as you ease yourself from the narrow bed you share with your younger sister. She whimpers in her sleep, instinctively curling into the warm depression you've left behind. You pause, listening to her breathing, making sure she hasn't woken. Let her sleep. She's only 10, too young yet for the factory, though that will change soon enough. Your fingers find the matches on the windowsill. Not the ones you make, not the lucifers that London swears by, but the cheaper kind that barely hold a flame. It takes 3 strikes before one catches, and in that brief flare of light, your world materializes, the single room that houses your entire family, barely 12 feet across. The damp has drawn patterns on the walls like diseased fingers reaching up from the floorboards. A pot sits on the cold stove. Last night's tea leaves still swimming in the dregs. Your mother sleeps in the corner, her face turned to the wall, her breathing laboured from years of her own factory work before her lungs gave out. The dress hanging on the nail by the door has gone stiff overnight. The phosphorus dried into the fabric like salt crystals. Even in the dark, you know it glows faintly green, marking you as surely as any brand. You pull it on over your shift, your fingers working the buttons by memory. The smell hits you immediately. That garlicky chemical stench that never quite leaves, no matter how many times you wash. It lives in your hair now, in the beds of your fingernails, in the very pores of your skin. Breakfast is 2 pieces of yesterday's bread. So hard you have to soak them in water to make them chewable. The water from the shared tap in the courtyard tastes of rust and something else you don't want to identify. You eat standing up, mechanically, fuel for the 14 hours ahead. The tea you make is mostly hot water with a memory of leaves, but the warmth is what matters, spreading through your chest like a small rebellion against the cold. The streets of Bow are beginning to stir as you step outside. Other shadows move through the darkness. Girls like you. Women who've been doing this for decades. Their faces carved hollow by exhaustion. You fall into step with them. A river of workers flowing toward the same destination. The factory girls from your tenement nod in recognition. There's Mary from 2 floors up, her Irish accent thick even in her silence. And Susan, whose mother worked the same frames 20 years ago. No one speaks. What is there to say that the darkness doesn't already know? As you walk, the city transforms around you. The cramped warrens of the East End gradually give way to wider streets. In the distance, you can make out the grand silhouettes of the city proper. The dome of St. Paul's like a judgment against the sky. The Parliament buildings where men make laws about lives they've never lived. That London might as well be another country, another world entirely. But it needs you, needs all of you, to keep its lights burning. The Bryant and May factory announces itself first by smell, then by sound. The phosphorus fog reaches you 3 streets away. That unmistakable garlic and sulphur combination that makes newcomers gag. Then comes the noise, a low rumble that grows to a roar as you approach. The sound of machinery that never sleeps, of progress that demands its daily sacrifice. The building looms before you. 6 stories of soot-blackened brick and small, mean windows that seem designed to keep light out rather than let it in. The gates stand open like a mouth, swallowing the stream of workers whole. Hundreds of you pour through, girls as young as 12, women old before their time. All of you bound by the same simple arithmetic, work or starve. The forewoman stands at the entrance to the main floor, her presence as fixed and unforgiving as the machinery itself. She's been here longer than anyone can remember, her face set in permanent disapproval, her eyes cataloguing every second of lateness, every sign of weakness. She knows your name, though she's never asked it, knows your station, your output, your place in the great machine. The whistle shrieks, a sound that pierces through your skull and seems to vibrate in your teeth. 6 o'clock. The day has officially begun. Inside, the heat hits you like a physical blow. The contrast with the morning cold is so extreme that for a moment you can't breathe. The air is thick, almost solid, with phosphorus fumes and the warmth of hundreds of bodies. The noise is beyond description. The mechanical thunder of the frames, the hiss of steam, the clatter of 1,000 small violences as wood meets chemical and chemical meets box. Your station waits for you like a patient predator. The wooden frame holds hundreds of splints, each one waiting for its baptism of poison. The pot of phosphorus paste sits before you, heated just enough to keep it liquid, its surface giving off those strange, beautiful fumes that dance like ghosts in the gaslight. Sometimes, in your exhaustion, you think you can see faces in those fumes, girls who work these same frames before you, their features dissolving and reforming in the chemical haze. Your hands begin their dance without conscious thought. Dip, place, dip, place. The splints must be coated evenly. Not too much or they won't dry properly. Not too little or they won't light. Each movement has been carved into your muscles by repetition, thousands upon thousands of times, until you could do this in your sleep. Sometimes you think you do. There are hours that disappear, where you surface from the rhythm to find hundreds of matches completed and no memory of making them. The other girls work beside you in the same trance. You've learned to communicate without words, without even looking at each other. A shift in breathing might mean the forewoman is approaching. A subtle change in the rhythm might signal that someone is falling behind and needs help. You're individuals, but you're also something else. Components in a vast machine, each dependent on the others to maintain the pace, to meet the quotas, to survive another day. The irony doesn't escape you. Even through the numbness of routine, each box you pack bears cheerful artwork, pastoral scenes of English countryside, rosy-cheeked children at play, ladies in gardens where flowers presumably don't wilt from phosphorus fumes. Bryant and May's special safety matches, the labels proclaim, though there's nothing safe about them, at least not for you. The safety is for the purchasers, the ones who will never know that each match they strike carries a fragment of your life, burned away in service to their convenience. The morning stretches on, marked only by the shifting quality of light through those mean windows and the gradual accumulation of completed boxes. Your back aches from standing, your feet throb, but these are constant companions now, as familiar as your own thoughts. The phosphorus paste begins to cake under your fingernails, and you know that tonight they'll glow in the dark like tiny green stars. No matter how hard you scrub, and underneath it all, barely acknowledged but always present, is the fear. Not the sharp fear of immediate danger, but the slow, creeping dread that lives in your jaw, in the roots of your teeth. You've seen what happens to girls who work here too long. They simply disappear one day. And if you ask, someone might whisper about a bad tooth before changing the subject. The phosphorus that makes the matches burn so bright has a hunger of its own, and it feeds on the bones of the girls who handle it. But that's a worry for another day, another year if you're lucky. For now, there's only the rhythm, the heat, the endless parade of matches marching from your fingers into their boxes, ready to bring light to a London that prefers not to see you at all. But beneath the monotony of endless days, something darker stirs. The warning comes in whispers, in glances quickly averted. In the careful distance the other girls begin to keep from Alice. She's worked 3 frames down from you for 2 years now, her quick fingers and quicker laugh making the days pass a little easier. But something has changed these past weeks. She's wrapped a scarf around her lower face, even in the suffocating heat of the factory floor, and when she thinks no one is looking, her hand drifts to her jaw with a tenderness that speaks of hidden pain. You notice the smell before anything else. It's different from the usual chemical reek of the phosphorus, different from the human odours of hundreds of bodies pressed together in close quarters. This is something else, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water, like meat beginning to turn. It clings to Alice despite the scarf, despite the distance she tries to maintain. The other girls have noticed too, the usual casual touching, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as matches are passed, has ceased around her. She's become an island in the sea of workers, isolated by an unspoken understanding of what that smell means. You watch her trying to hide it, see the way she turns her face away when she needs to cough, the careful way she takes her lunch, what little she can manage, chewing only on one side of her mouth. The forewoman has noticed too, her sharp eyes tracking Alice's movements, calculating productivity against the inevitable. Everyone knows, but no one speaks it aloud, as if naming the thing might invite it to spread, might mark them as the next victim of the phosphorus's patient hunger. The day Alice doesn't come to work, her frame stands empty like a missing tooth in a smile. No one asks where she is, no one needs to. By afternoon, a new girl has taken her place, younger than Alice was when she started. Her movements still clumsy with inexperience. You want to warn her, to tell her to be careful, to watch for the signs. But what good would it do? She needs the work same as you all do. The arithmetic remains unchanged. Work or starve, poison or poverty. That night, walking home through the familiar streets, You find yourself thinking about Alice's laugh, the way it used to ring out during the brief moments of respite, defiant against the grinding monotony. You wonder where she is now, back with family if she has any, or in one of the charity wards if she doesn't. You wonder if she can still eat, if the poison has taken her jaw yet, if she lies awake at night feeling her own bones dissolving from within. The thought follows you home, up the narrow stairs, into the room where your family sleeps. You lie awake, running your tongue along your teeth, pressing gently against your jaw, searching for any hint of looseness, any telltale ache that might signal the beginning of the end. Every normal sensation becomes suspicious. Is that just fatigue from clenching your teeth? Or is it starting? Is that smell on your clothes just the usual phosphorus? Or is it beginning to smell sweeter, more organic? Your mother coughs in her sleep, and you wonder if she knows what you risk every day. Of course she knows. She worked in a factory herself before her lungs gave out. Not matches, but cotton, where the fibres filled the air like snow and settled in workers' chests until breathing became a labour in itself. She knows the bargain you make each morning when you walk out the door. She knows because she made it herself for years, trading pieces of her body for the coins that kept her children fed. Days pass, then weeks, and Alice becomes just another ghost in the long history of the factory. Her name added to the unwritten roll of girls who simply disappeared. You hear through whispered gossip that she's gone to stay with an aunt in the countryside. But everyone knows what that means. The countryside is where factory girls go to die quietly, away from the eyes of those who might ask uncomfortable questions about the true cost of London's convenient light. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday that starts like every other Tuesday, you feel it. The ache begins so subtly you almost miss it, lost in the general cacophony of pains that come from 14-hour days on your feet. But this is different. This isn't the surface ache of tired muscles or the sharp complaint of a back bent too long over your work. This comes from deeper, from the bone itself. A cold, hollow throb that seems to pulse in time with your heartbeat. You tell yourself it's nothing. You bit down too hard on that stale bread this morning. You've been clenching your teeth in your sleep. Your sister has mentioned hearing you grind them in the night. It's the cold weather, the damp, anything but what you know. With a certainty that sits like lead in your stomach, it actually is. The pain settles in your lower jaw, on the left side, exactly where Alice used to press her hand when she thought no one was looking. You find yourself unconsciously mimicking that gesture now, your fingers seeking the spot as if touch could somehow soothe what's happening beneath the skin. The bone feels the same as it always has, solid and normal under your probing fingers. But you know the poison works from the inside out, patient and thorough. You work faster that day, as if increased productivity might somehow earn you a reprieve, as if the phosphorus might respect dedication and spare you its hunger. Your fingers fly across the frames, barely pausing between dips, and for a brief moment the forewoman's eyes rest on you with something that might almost be approval. But speed won't save you. Nothing will save you. You've seen too many girls try working harder, praying louder, scrubbing their hands raw as if they could wash the poison out through their skin. The walk home that evening takes longer, or perhaps it just feels that way. Each step seems to jar the ache in your jaw, sending little lightning bolts of pain up into your ear and down into your neck. The familiar streets blur at the edges, and you realise you're crying. Not dramatically, not with sobs that might draw attention, but silently. Tears mixing with the general grime of the day until you can taste salt and phosphorus on your lips. You think about telling your mother, but what would be the point? She can't pull you from the factory. The family needs your wages. She can't cure what's beginning. No one can. All it would do is add another burden to her shoulders, already bowed from carrying so many. So you swallow the words along with the pain, storing both in that growing collection of things that must be endured in silence. That night, you dream of Alice. She's standing at her old frame. But instead of matches, she's dipping her own teeth into the phosphorus, one by one, watching them dissolve and reform as tiny points of light. She turns to you, and where her jaw should be, there's only darkness, a void that seems to pull at the edges of reality. She tries to speak, but without a jaw, the words come out as a whistle, like steam escaping from a kettle, like the factory whistle that calls you to work, like the wind through the gaps in your tenement windows. You wake to that same wind, that same cold, that same darkness that precedes another day at Bryant and May. The ache in your jaw has settled into a constant companion, neither better nor worse, just present. A reminder that your body has begun its betrayal. You dress in your phosphorus-stiff dress, eat your meagre breakfast, and walk to work, joining the river of girls flowing toward the factory gates. Because what else is there to do? You're 13 years old. You have no money for doctors, no alternative employment that would take you, no escape route from this path you're on. You know how this story ends. You've seen it played out too many times, but between now and that ending, there are still wages to earn, still matches to make, still a family depending on those few coins you bring home each week. The factory whistle shrieks its morning welcome, and you take your place at your frame, your fingers beginning their familiar dance even as your jaw throbs its own slower rhythm. Around you, hundreds of other girls work in similar silence, each nursing their own fears, their own secret pains, their own certainty that they're trading away pieces of themselves for the privilege of survival. This is your future, stretched out before you like an endless line of matches waiting to be dipped. Work until you can't. Suffer in silence. Disappear quietly when the phosphorus has taken enough. You're trapped in a machine larger than the factory itself, a system that consumes girls like you as fuel for the Empire's bright lights. At least, that's what you believe on this ordinary Tuesday, as the pain in your jaw keeps time with the rhythm of your work. You have no reason to imagine that change is coming, that voices are about to be raised on your behalf, that the spark of rebellion is already catching in places you cannot see. For now, there is only the work, the pain, and the terrible certainty of what's to come, and you're not alone in this feeling. A quiet desperation has begun to settle over the factory floor, a shared, unspoken fear that is heavier than the phosphorus fumes. You're all trapped, and you all know it. The factory is a sealed tomb, and no one is coming to save you, or so you believe. But sometimes, when the darkness seems absolute, unexpected light appears. A woman appears at the factory gates on a Thursday morning like something from another world entirely. Her dress is well made, deep blue wool that hasn't been worn thin by years of use, and her boots click against the cobblestones with the confidence of someone who's never had to wonder if they'll last another winter. But it's not her clothes that make the girl stop and stare as they file past her into work. It's the way she looks at you all. Not through you, the way the middle-class charity visitors do, not down at you with pity or disgust, but directly at you, as if she's seeing something everyone else has missed. The forewoman tries to shoo her away at first, the way you'd chase off a stray dog from the factory doors. But this woman doesn't shoo. She stands her ground with a firmness that speaks of battles fought in drawing rooms and lecture halls. A different kind of strength than the physical endurance you know, but strength nonetheless. She has papers with her, a notebook and pen, and she's writing things down as she watches the stream of workers enter the building. You learn her name from Mary, who heard it from her cousin who works at the docks where this woman has been making speeches. Annie Besant, a name that comes weighted with scandal and admiration in equal measure. She's one of those socialists, the older women whisper. Those radicals who think the world should be turned upside down. She's been divorced, practically unheard of, and writes for newspapers, gives lectures, challenges men in public debates. She's everything a proper Victorian woman isn't supposed to be, and perhaps that's why, when she appears again the next morning and the morning after that, Some of you begin to slow your steps as you pass her. On the fourth day, she speaks to you, not the general you, the collective mass of workers, but you specifically, catching your eye as you approach the gates. Her voice carries the crisp tones of education, but there's something else in it too, a fury carefully controlled, like a fire banked but still burning. She asks if you'd be willing to talk to her, to tell her about your work, your wages, your life. The forewoman is watching from the doorway, her face dark with warning, and you know there will be consequences for stopping. But something in this woman's eyes, the way she waits for your answer as if it truly matters, makes you nod. The conversation happens in snatches, dangerous moments stolen during the brief lunch break when you're supposed to be eating your bread at your frame. Annie Besant listens with an intensity that's almost uncomfortable, her pen flying across the page as you tell her about the fines. 3p for dropping matches, 6p for talking, a shilling for sitting down without permission. You tell her about eating lunch surrounded by phosphorus fumes, about the girls who develop phossy jaw, though your voice drops to barely a whisper when you mention this. Your hand unconsciously moving to your own aching jaw. She asks about wages, and you tell her. 4 shillings a week if you're lucky. Less after the fines. Less if you're sick and miss a day. Less if the forewoman simply decides you've been too slow. She asks about hours, and you explain the 14-hour days, the 6-day weeks, the way time becomes meaningless inside the factory walls. Her face changes as you talk, a tightening around her eyes, a set to her mouth that speaks of decisions being made. Other girls begin to join these furtive conversations. Sarah Chapman, who's older than you at 25 and can read and write, something she learned from a sympathetic Sunday school teacher years ago. She brings a quiet authority to the meetings, translating the younger girls' rambling complaints into clear, specific grievances. There's Mary Driscoll too, only 14 but fierce as someone twice her age. Her Irish accent thick with anger as she describes the forewoman's particular cruelty to the immigrant girls. The day Annie Besant stops coming to the gates, you feel the loss like a physical absence. Had she gotten what she needed and abandoned you? Was this just another middle-class woman's temporary interest in the poor, satisfied now that she had her stories? The doubt gnaws at you worse than the constant ache in your jaw, because for those few days, talking to her, having someone actually listen and write down your words as if they mattered, you'd felt something dangerous stirring. Hope. Then Mary Driscoll smuggles something into the factory, hidden beneath her shawl, passed hand to hand during the chaos of the shift change. It's a newspaper, the Link, and even those who can't read recognise the crude drawing on the front page. A girl bent over a match frame, her face gaunt, her hands skeletal, and above her, a fat man in a top hat counting coins. Sarah Chapman reads it aloud during lunch, her voice barely above a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the meal break, it carries. White Slavery in London, the article is called, and every word of it is true. More than true. It's your life laid out in print for all of London to see. The fines, the phosphorus, the disease, the way Bryant and May makes 23% profit while paying you starvation wages. But it's the final paragraph that makes something shift in the air of the factory floor. Something electric and dangerous. Who cares for the fate of these white wage slaves? Born in slums, driven to work while still children, undersized because underfed, oppressed because helpless, flung aside as soon as worked out. Who cares if they die or go onto the streets provided only that Bryant and May shareholders get their 23%? Someone does care, you realise. This woman, this Annie Besant, she cares, and she's told your story to the world. The forewoman must sense the change, because she becomes even harsher that afternoon, her voice sharp as she criticises your work, finding faults where none exist. But there's something different in the way you all respond. Where before you would have hunched your shoulders and worked faster, now you exchange glances. where before you would have absorbed the abuse in isolation, now you feel the solidarity of shared indignation. That evening, walking home, the girls cluster together in groups rather than spreading out along the street. The conversation is animated for the first time in memory, voices rising above their usual exhausted murmur. Someone says the newspaper has been selling out all over London, that people are talking about it in the omnibuses and coffee houses. Someone else says their brother heard men discussing it at the docks, expressing shock at the conditions, anger at Bryant and May. You think about all those cheerful matchboxes you've packed, sailing out into the world carrying their hidden cargo of misery. Now the people who buy them know. They know about the phosphorus, about the fines, about girls like Alice who simply disappear when their jaws begin to rot. The secret is out, and you can feel something building, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Your jaw still aches as you climb the stairs to your room that night, the pain now a constant companion that spikes whenever you try to eat. You know you're running out of time, that soon you'll be another Alice. Another ghost story whispered in the factory. But for the first time since the pain began, it doesn't feel like the end of your story, because now people know. Annie Besant has given you something more precious than charity or pity. She's given you a voice. Your suffering is no longer invisible, no longer something to be endured in shameful silence. It's been named, documented, published for all to see, and in that naming, that acknowledgement, you feel the first stirrings of something you'd thought was lost forever. Not just hope, but anger. Clean, righteous anger that burns hotter than any phosphorus flame. That anger needs only the smallest provocation to ignite. The morning after the article appears, the very air in the factory feels different, charged with an energy that makes the forewoman's eyes dart nervously from girl to girl. The managers must have read it too, because there are more of them than usual on the floor, their dark suits moving between the frames like carrion birds, watching, listening, waiting for any sign of trouble. It comes at mid-morning, the factory manager himself, a man whose name you know, but who has never before descended to the factory floor, arrives with a document. He speaks to the forewoman, who nods grimly and begins calling girls forward in groups of 20. Your turn comes soon enough, and you find yourself pressed together with the others in a circle around this man who smells of tobacco and pomade. So different from the phosphorus and sweat scent that defines your world. He holds up the paper, and even from where you stand, you can see it's been carefully prepared, the writing neat and official looking. His voice, when he speaks, carries the authority of someone who's never had his words questioned. He tells you that the newspaper article was full of lies, that you've been misrepresented, that Bryant and May has always been a fair and generous employer. The words are so divorced from reality that for a moment you wonder if he's talking about some other factory, some other girls. Then comes the demand. Each of you must sign this paper stating that you're happy with your working conditions, that the article was false, that you have no complaints against Bryant and May. He makes it sound reasonable, even generous. After all, he says, the company's reputation has been damaged by these lies, and surely you wouldn't want the factory to close because of false accusations. Where would you work then? The threat is clear even through the veneer of concern. Sign or face the consequences. Sign or be marked as a troublemaker. Sign or find yourself without work, without wages, without any way to feed your family. The first girl steps forward, and you recognize her. She's new, only been working here a month, still has that desperate eagerness to please that marks the recently hired. Her hand shakes as she reaches for the pen, but before she can take it, Sarah Chapman speaks. Her voice isn't loud, but in the tense silence, it carries perfectly. She says simply that she cannot sign something that isn't true, that the article described exactly what life is like at Bryant and May, that her conscience won't allow her to lie. The manager's face darkens to a colour that matches the phosphorus stains on your dress. He demands to know her name. though of course he already knows it. Sarah's been here for years, one of the most reliable workers. The forewoman provides it eagerly, sensing blood in the water. Sarah's told to return to her frame, that this will be dealt with later. One by one, the rest of you are asked to sign. One by one, following Sarah's lead, you refuse. Your voice, when your turn comes, sounds strange to your own ears. Steady, clear, nothing like the usual mumbled responses you give to authority. You say no, you won't sign. The article was true. The manager's composure cracks entirely. He bellows that you're all ungrateful wretches, that you don't deserve the employment Bryant and May provides, that you'll all be replaced by tomorrow with girls who appreciate the opportunity to work. But as he storms off, document unsigned, you all know the truth. There aren't enough desperate girls in all of London to replace 1,400 trained workers overnight. The rest of the day passes in a strange tension, like the moment between lightning and thunder. Everyone works, but the usual rhythm is broken. Heads turn whenever someone walks by. Whispers pass from frame to frame despite the threat of fines. The forewoman paces the floor like a caged animal, sensing that something fundamental has shifted but not knowing how to restore the old order. 3 days later, they fire one of the girls who spoke to Annie Besant. The news spreads through the factory floor like flame along a match. She wasn't just any girl. She was one of the ones who'd been brave enough to tell the truth, to risk everything to let the world know what happens behind these walls. And now she's been punished for it, thrown out without reference, which means no other factory will hire her. She might as well have been sentenced to death, just slower. The rage that erupts is unlike anything you've ever felt. It starts in your chest, hot and bright, spreading through your limbs until your whole body trembles with it. You look around and see the same fury reflected in every face. Irish and English, young and old, all united in this moment of perfect crystalline anger. You don't know who stops working first. Maybe it's Sarah Chapman, her hands simply falling still at her frame. Maybe it's Mary Driscoll, stepping back from her station with a defiance that seems to radiate from her small frame. Maybe it's you, your aching jaw finally providing the excuse to stop, to rest, to resist. But within moments, the entire floor has gone quiet. The sudden absence of sound is shocking. For the first time in memory, the machines aren't running, the frames aren't clacking, the constant industrial thunder has ceased. In the silence, you can hear individual heartbeats, individual breaths, the creak of the building itself as if it too is surprised by this unprecedented stillness. The forewoman's shriek breaks the spell, her voice cracking as she orders everyone back to work, threatens fines, threatens dismissal, threatens everything she can think of. But her words fall into the silence and disappear without effect, because you're all looking at each other, really seeing each other for the first time, not as competing workers trying to survive another day, but as a force, a power that you never knew you possessed. Sarah Chapman moves first, walking toward the door with a dignity that makes her phosphorus-stained dress look like royal robes. Mary Driscoll follows, then another girl, then another. You join the stream, your legs moving without conscious thought, carried along by something larger than an individual will. The forewoman tries to block the doorway, but faced with hundreds of girls moving with unified purpose, she steps aside. The sunlight outside is blinding. You've never been outside during working hours before, never seen the sun at this angle, never felt it on your face when you should be hunched over your frame. The street seems impossibly wide, the sky impossibly high. You stand there with the others, blinking in the brightness, breathing air that doesn't taste of phosphorus, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than you've ever been. Someone starts to speak. Sarah Chapman, you think. Though in your dazed state it's hard to be sure. She's saying something about organising, about staying together, about making sure the girl who was fired is reinstated. Her words blend with the ringing in your ears, the thundering of your heart, the persistent ache in your jaw that for once seems insignificant compared to the magnitude of what you've just done. You've walked out, you've stopped working, you've said no to Bryant and May, to the managers, to the whole system that depends on your silent suffering. You don't know what will happen tomorrow, whether you'll have work to return to, whether your family will starve because of this moment of defiance. But standing there in the unexpected sunshine, surrounded by hundreds of girls who've made the same choice, you feel something you haven't felt since that first day you walked through the factory gates. You feel human, you feel powerful, you feel like maybe, just maybe, the world can be different than it's always been. The strike has begun, and as you stand with your sisters in the fading light, you know that nothing will ever be the same again. For you, for the factory, or for the city of London itself. Now comes the harder part. The first morning of the strike, you arrive at the factory gates before dawn, not to work but to stand guard. The very act feels revolutionary. Your body knows it should be moving toward the frames, beginning the familiar rhythm of production, but instead you plant yourself outside those gates like a human barrier. Sarah Chapman has organised you all into shifts, making sure the picket line never breaks, never weakens. She carries a ledger now, keeping track of who's here, who needs help, who's wavering in their resolve. The early morning light reveals an extraordinary sight. Hundreds of girls and women arranged in lines, some holding hastily made signs that read fair wages and no more fines, others simply standing with linked arms, creating a wall of solidarity. The youngest girls, some only 12, stand beside women who've worked these frames for 20 years. Irish accents mingle with Cockney ones, all unified in purpose. The company tries everything. First, they send the forewoman out to promise that anyone who returns to work immediately will face no punishment. When that fails, they try bringing in replacement workers. Desperate women from other districts who don't know about the phosphorus, about the jaw rot, about the slow death that awaits inside. But you and the others surround these would-be replacements, not with violence but with truth, telling them exactly what they're walking into. Most turn away. The few who try to push through find themselves faced with a moral weight they hadn't expected. The eyes of hundreds of women who are risking everything for dignity. On the third day, something remarkable happens. A carriage pulls up, finer than anything usually seen in this part of London, and Annie Besant emerges, but she doesn't come alone. With her are several well-dressed women and men. Members of the Fabian Society, she explains. Socialists who believe in your cause. They've brought food, bread and cheese and even some meat, and money, collected from supporters across London who read about your strike in the newspapers. That evening, you find yourself in a pub on Bow Road, crowded into a back room with the strike committee. The air is thick with tobacco smoke and the yeasty smell of beer. Though most of you are drinking tea, you need clear heads for this. Annie Besant sits at the centre of the table, but she's careful not to dominate. She asks questions, offers suggestions, but always defers to Sarah Chapman and the other workers. This is your strike, she emphasises. Your fight. She's just here to help amplify your voices. The discussion is intense, sometimes heated. Mary Driscoll, despite being the youngest committee member, argues fiercely that the strike shouldn't end until the phosphorus itself is addressed. What good are higher wages if you're all dying anyway? Sarah Chapman, ever practical, points out that Bryant and May will never willingly give up white phosphorus when it's so much cheaper than the safe alternative. Annie Besant suggests a compromise. Focus on winnable demands now. Build the union's strength, then fight the larger battle from a position of power. You listen to it all, your jaw throbbing with its now familiar ache. And think about how impossible this scene would have been just weeks ago. Factory girls don't meet in pubs to discuss strategy. They don't have middle-class allies taking their side. They don't make demands of their employers. Yet here you are, doing all of these things. and the world hasn't ended. If anything, it's begun to crack open, revealing possibilities you never imagined. The news comes on the 5th day that your strike has been raised in Parliament. An actual member of Parliament, a Scottish radical named Cunningham Graham, has stood up in the House of Commons and demanded an investigation into Bryant and May's practices. He's read from Annie Besant's article, quoted the testimony you and the others provided, made the powerful men of government confront the reality of your suffering. The donations increased dramatically after that. Not just money, though that flows in too, enough to ensure that no striker's family goes hungry, but also letters of support, offers of help, expressions of outrage from people you'll never meet. A group of dock workers sends a contribution along with a note saying they stand with their sisters. A wealthy lady in Mayfair sends £50 with an apology for never questioning where her matches came from. Bryant and May tries one more tactic. They claim the strike is the work of outside agitators, that you've all been misled by socialists and radicals, that you don't really understand what you're asking for. The accusation stings because you know how it makes you look. Like children, unable to think for yourselves, puppets dancing to someone else's strings. But Sarah Chapman's response is magnificent. She calls a mass meeting right there in the street, in full view of the journalists who've begun haunting the factory gates. She speaks clearly and forcefully, her voice carrying over the crowd. She lists every grievance, every abuse, every girl who's died from phossy jaw. She names names, cites dates, provides evidence, and then she says the words that will be quoted in every newspaper the next day. We are not victims anymore, we are a union. After 2 weeks, Bryant and May breaks. The meeting happens in the factory owner's office, a room none of you have ever seen before. The strike committee is there. Sarah Chapman, Mary Driscoll, and the others, along with Annie Besant and representatives from the London Trades Council, who've come to ensure fair negotiations. You're not in the room, but you wait outside with hundreds of others, the crowd spilling out onto the street, everyone holding their breath. When the door finally opens and Sarah Chapman emerges, her face is unreadable. For a moment, the silence stretches unbearably. Then she smiles. A real smile. Not the grim determination you've seen for 2 weeks, and announces simply, "We've won." The roar that erupts shakes the windows. Girls are crying, laughing, embracing each other with a joy that's almost violent in its intensity. Because the terms Sarah reads out are everything you dared hope for and more. All fines abolished immediately. The fired girl reinstated with back pay, wages increased, a separate room provided for meals, away from the phosphorus fumes, a grievance procedure established so workers can complain directly to management without going through the forewoman, and most remarkably, recognition of your union. The Union of Women Matchmakers, a formal organisation that will represent your interests, negotiate on your behalf, stand between you and the arbitrary cruelty of management. You think about Alice as you stand there in the crowd, about all the girls who came before, who suffered and died without ever imagining that change was possible. The victory doesn't bring them back, doesn't cure the ache in your jaw that reminds you daily of the poison still in your bones. Bryant and May hasn't agreed to stop using white phosphorus. That battle will take another 20 years to win. But something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer invisible, no longer voiceless, no longer alone. You have a union now, a collective strength that no individual girl could ever possess. You have allies who see your humanity and fight for your dignity. You have the knowledge that when you stand together, even the most powerful company in London must listen. 10 days after the victory, you attend the first official meeting of the Union of Women Matchmakers at Stepney Meeting Hall. The room is packed with 200 girls and women, their faces bright with a hope you've never seen before. Sarah Chapman is elected president, her quiet strength having proved itself in the crucible of the strike. Annie Besant becomes secretary, using her education and connections to support your cause. As you sit there, surrounded by your sisters in labour, you think about the matches you've made, hundreds of thousands of them, each one a small fire waiting to be born. You think about how you were like those matches, potential energy, waiting for the right friction to ignite. Annie Besant provided the spark, but the fire was always yours, always waiting in your exhausted bodies and determined spirits. Your jaw still aches, the phosphorus is still there, patient and inexorable, doing its slow work of destruction. Many of you will still die young, bodies sacrificed to the industrial machine, but you'll die differently now. Not as victims, but as fighters. Not in silence, but with voices that have been heard across London and beyond. The Matchgirls' strike of 1888 will be remembered as the moment when the smallest spark created the brightest flame. When teenage girls, many of them immigrants, all of them considered disposable, stood up to one of the most powerful companies in the British Empire and won. Your victory will inspire dock workers the following year, gas workers after that, a cascade of strikes that will eventually lead to the modern labour movement. But tonight, in this moment, you don't know about the history you're making. You only know that tomorrow you'll return to work with your head held high, to a factory where you have rights, where you have a voice, where you have dignity. The phosphorus still glows on your clothes as you walk home, that eerie green light that marks you as a match girl. But now it seems less like a badge of shame and more like a badge of honour. The light of your own courage made visible. You think about your little sister, asleep in the bed you share, only 10 years old but growing fast. Maybe she won't have to work in the factory at all. Maybe the world will be different by the time she's 13. Maybe the sacrifice of your jaw, your health, your youth, will mean something more than just survival. As you lie down to sleep, the ache in your jaw settling into its nighttime rhythm, you allow yourself to feel something you haven't felt in so long you'd almost forgotten it existed. Not just hope, but pride. You're a match girl. You're a union member. You're part of something larger than yourself, part of a light that will continue burning long after you're gone. The luminous spark has been lit, and it will never be extinguished. Rest now, knowing that your courage changed the world. Rest now, knowing that your suffering was not in vain. Rest now, knowing that sometimes the smallest lights cast the longest shadows, and that your shadow, the shadow of the match girls who said no more, will stretch across decades, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and demand their dignity. Your story doesn't end with tragedy. It ends with transformation. It ends with triumph. It ends with you discovering that even the most poisonous circumstances can't kill the human spirit when it burns bright enough, when it burns together, when it refuses to be extinguished. Sleep well, brave match girl, you've earned your rest. This reminds us that history is often written not by kings and generals, but by the quiet courage of ordinary people who refuse to be silenced. If these hidden chapters of the fight for dignity speak to you, consider subscribing for more carefully researched journeys where we explore the complex truths that shape the world we live in today. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, sleep well,